Humanity and its Imperium is beset from within, without, and beyond, and to combat these various threats, the various orders of the Inquisition were developed. Over various logs in the past, we have explored much of the organization's history, as well as that of the organizations subsidiary to it, or more accurately, that work alongside it. Well, all save one, at least until today. Neither the oldest nor the youngest of the three Chambers Militant, their role is perhaps the most diverse simply due to the broad range of enemies they must combat. This is the Space Marine Force dedicated to fighting and even learning from the various Xenos races the galaxy over, but unlike the Grey Knights, they are not a standalone Astartes chapter who recruit members from youth and such. Rather, this chapter inducts members from other Space Marine chapters on a temporary basis, just as they have for all of time since their inception. Led by their Watch Commander and/or the Watch Masters, they are the Chamber Militant of the Ordo Xenos with its fortress monastery on the world of Talassa Prime. Founded in M32 under the command of Asger Warfist of the Space Wolves, their various small kill teams are better known collectively as the Deathwatch. This is Tactica Imperialis, and welcome to 40k Stories.
In M32, for the first time since they defeated Olenor in the Great Crusade, the Orcs emerged as a major galactic threat under the leadership of the Orc known only as the Beast. The war that followed, known as the War of the Beast, nearly toppled the Imperium for a second time in a little over 1500 years, with the Greenskins able to invade Terra itself and much strife within the High Lords of Terra as well. If you needed a sense of scale, even the return of the Primarch Vulcan wasn't enough to seemingly stop the Beast, as following its supposed death at Vulcan's hand, it seemed to survive. Admittedly, Vulcan had in fact slain one of the Prime Orcs while the Beast yet lived, and it was after this battle on Olenor that the Deathwatch's story began. Lord Commander of the Imperium Corland proposed the creation of Astartes kill teams to hunt down and slay the Orc leadership. Given the fact he'd been working with Master of Assassins Draken Rangarich, maybe this was an adaptation of the Officio Assassinorum execution forces in some way. Though initially the High Lords of Terra were having absolutely none of it, the reactivation of the Orc attack moon over Terra was enough to spur the Senatorum Imperialis to action and to approval. Unfortunately, there wasn't time for a new founding of Space Marines, and the High Lords were still distrustful of Corland having his own personal Space Marine forces since that, in their mind, flew in the face of the work of Robert Guilliman. As such, a compromise was reached during a meeting between Corland and Inquisitorial representative Margaret Wienand. This new force would be placed under the purview of the Inquisition even if it would have a Space Marine leader, and furthermore, it would be composed of members of existing chapters rather than being a unique standalone one. It is believed that the Ordo Xenos had yet to be officially separated from the Ordo Malleus at this time, but once that had been done and Wienand became its leader, then the Space Marines became the Chamber Militant. The name of this force was chosen in honour of the Space Marines who had died in the invasion of Olenor, and they became known then and always as the Deathwatch. The first chapter master, known as the Watch Commander, was Asger Warfist, a Space Wolf Wolflord who had fought on Olenor the first time, though he didn't actually officially get the position until just before the second invasion, during which Corland was slain. The first Deathwatch action was boarding the Terran attack moon in an attempt to disable, or, if the Mechanicum were able to reverse engineer successfully the Orc technology, teleport it away. This half worked, but the other half of the moon shattered and severely damaged the Imperial Palace, but Corland and the Deathwatch pressed on. It was members of the Deathwatch who would seek out the last of the Sisters of Silence to recruit them to the war, by name-dropping Vulcan admittedly, but it worked nonetheless. They then acted as the agents of Corland and Co. as they sought out Orc Psychers on planets including Valhalla, as it was planned to use them and the Silent Sisterhood to create a reverse war effect and kill the Beast, which would actually work eventually, though it was with Maximus Thane in command of the Imperium rather than Corland, who was dead. The Deathwatch were then involved in much of the major action in the rest of the War of the Beast, including both the failed second and then the successful third invasion of Olenor, and once that was done, the role they took has been pretty much the same ever since. Following their overarching tale at this point becomes a lot more difficult due to their structure, which we'll cover in more detail a little later, but they have remained active throughout the millennia. As far as I can tell, their current chapter master is probably Mordelai of the Imperial Fists, as he leads their primary base of operations, but it may be they don't even have one or need one. Their role is simple, summarized by their motto / battle cry / catchphrase: "Suffer not the alien to live." They are Xenos hunters, plain and simple, fighting in their small kill teams in covert ops that they did in those early days, or fighting as larger armies to combat bigger, more dangerous alien foes. However, they also recover Xenos technology on occasion, both for study and even sometimes for use in their own arsenal or more broadly. For example, the phase swords of the Kalidas assassins will have originally been covered or at least signed off for use by the Deathwatch, and the esoteric arsenal of Ordo Xenos Inquisitors are just as obviously theirs. There is a phrase I'm sure about using someone's own weapons against them, and by researching the technology, the Deathwatch might be some of the best researchers in the Imperium, able to both understand what their enemies are using against them, and even turn it on them, if they wish to. The structure of the Deathwatch is, even more than perhaps the Grey Knights, radically different from the typical Codex chapters, even if they were formed after the penning of Guilliman's tome. The home world of the Deathwatch is the world of Thalassa Prime and Ultima Segmentum, home to the largest of places that are known as Watch Fortresses, a self-sustained place much like a fortress monastery, home to training facilities, docks, and even research labs. There are several of these fortresses dotted about the galaxy, although the largest is on Thalassa Prime, including Watch Fortress Eriok in the Jericho Reach that is home to a very special place, the Omega Vault. This place is a lot of a mystery, seemingly dispensing gifts of lore and equipment at random intervals that the Deathwatch have undoubtedly made good use of. It also contains a secondary vault that has slowly been opening over the centuries, and part of me doesn't want to know what will come out when it finally does. Smaller Deathwatch facilities are known as watch stations, and they are unsurprisingly much more numerous than watch fortresses. Not all of them are manned at all times by anything more than a skeleton non-Astartes crew that allow operations to be coordinated. As concerns those Astartes, the Deathwatch are totally unique in that they don't raise their own recruits or have scouts or equivalents, etc., etc., etc. Rather, just like the original members in the War of the Beast, members of the Deathwatch are recruited from members of existing chapters, both from the rank and file and even specialists such as librarians, apothecaries, and chaplains. It is unclear what exactly the deal is between the Watch and the other chapters regarding the transfer of Battle Brothers, especially when specialists or commanders get involved in the equation. But whatever oaths are sworn are considered a great dishonour to break, and though there is a vow of silence upon completion of service, being part of the Deathwatch is still a great honour for those Marines involved. Upon joining the Deathwatch, a Marine will paint the majority of his armour black. I believe the phrase donning the black is a byword for serving in the Watch, but they will keep their parent chapter's symbol upon their shoulder pad. They will then be placed as part of a kill team, another word for a squad, though they are much more diverse in both composition, weapons, armour, and even equipment. Terminators, bikers, jump packs and more, well, they can all be part of the same kill team. Even Dreadnoughts can. The membership seems to be at the discretion of the officers in command depending on experience, but the team will often become fast friends or at least show great amounts of respect, whatever their origins. Even Dark Angels and Space Wolves, if you can believe it. The training is relentless, including simulations of various scenarios as well as relentless combat drills, but when the team is ready and or the situation calls for them, they will be deployed. The majority of these operations will be headed up by an Inquisitor, an echo of the deal between Courland and Vina and all those millennia ago. But if absolutely necessary, command may fall to a captain or a librarian who seemingly commands the same absolute authority as the Inquisitor they're standing in for. Unlike the Grey Knights, the Deathwatch do not operate strictly in the shadows, which is obvious given their membership and recruitment when you think about it, but it's not like only the Space Marines know of them either, since they can be deployed to conventional war zones as well as on their specialist operations. As far as numbers are concerned, the nature of Deathwatch deployment makes keeping count very, very difficult, and I wager the number is very fluid as members will be coming and going quite often. However, I would be very surprised if the Deathwatch were Codex compliant, and I use that term very loosely nowadays given the new reforms Guilliman's working on. If they were, they'd have a maximum of 1,000 members, and I just don't see it. Between the 24-ish watch fortresses, with the one at Thalassa Prime alone home to 25 kill teams, I find it extremely likely that the Deathwatch is a much larger organisation, but as they're so spread out and rarely gather in any notable strength, we will likely never know. As for leaving the Deathwatch, For the majority who survive their various operations, they will simply return to their parent chapter when the Watchmasters let them go. Of course, not everyone makes it out alive, and assumedly those fallen brothers are treated with the highest of honour both by the Watch and the chapter they left. But the Deathwatch also have a small number of dreadnoughts amongst their ranks. Getting a dreadnought-worthy candidate out from a battle or op is rare enough, but to stay with the Watch, the Astartes themselves and the parent chapter must consent, and the commanders must deem them worthy of entombment. The reason for all this hoop jumping is that Deathwatch dreadnoughts never leave the Watch. Effectively, they're giving up on ever going home and seeing their parent chapter again, even with their new armoured form, and as much as they're Space Marines, that can't be that easy a decision, it's still quite big. As a result, there aren't many of them, but the Deathwatch dreadnoughts are incredible assets both on and off the battlefield, serving as information repositories and deadly combatants both. As far as equipment goes, well, the Deathwatch have unique stuff of their own, as you might expect. The Xenos weapons they recover are just the beginning. They are, I believe, the only force outside the Adeptus Custodes with access to the Guardian Spear, and they can be outfitted with unique shotguns, frag cannons, and much more. They also have a unique gunship or transport in their arsenal known as the Corvus Blackstar. With that name, I bet you a Raven Guard designed it. This sleek, speedy craft is often able to evade sensors and the like due to its size, before delivering its black armoured Astartes payload and going on to wreak havoc. The Tech Marine pilot links with the machine spirit, such as the intensity of their training together. Suffice it to say, between their training and their gear, if you're not human, then you really don't want to be around the Deathwatch. Which is a shame, really, since I'd love to get access to all that information they've gathered down the years. Never mind.
As non-human threats menace the Imperium near constantly, it is of little surprise that the Deathwatch have been very busy throughout the past 9 or 10,000 years. Keeping tabs on every individual operation is completely impossible, especially given their secretive nature, but one of the largest full-scale operations was actually a full-on crusade prosecuted entirely by the Deathwatch. This took place in M36 against a human Xenos coalition known as the Autocracy of Zea, who got on so well apparently with each other that it was a personal affront to the Watch commander at the time. As for why the Deathwatch soloed it, said Watch commander didn't want the Astra Militarum exposed to the blasphemy of the Autocracy's cooperation. Makes me wonder what his response would have been if he'd have been around when the Imperium found the Tau. Interesting. Suffice it to say that whilst the records of the Crusade are lost, I can't see the Deathwatch losing that one, and though there are no other records of pure Deathwatch crusades, I wouldn't be surprised if there was another, or there will be another someday. Also in M36 came a reminder that the Deathwatch is still first and foremost a branch of the Inquisition, as they were sent in relatively large numbers against the Adeptus Mechanicus. A faction of the cult of the Machine God are known as the Xenorites, who study Xenos technology but often end up clashing with their kin and allies as a result. Suffice to say that this time the Inquisition properly snapped and sent the Deathwatch after the Xenorites drew the Order Xenos' ire. The battle that followed on the Forge World of Stygius 7 sent many of the Xenorites running, and to be honest the Deathwatch may want to hunt them down again since some of them breached the webway once they had a new home. As you'd expect, the Deathwatch have also been involved in more than a couple of xenocidal purges down the years. Urgals and Slith, both parts of a typical Drakari Court of the Archon, have been on the wrong end of the Black Armoured Space Marines, as have pretty much every other race from Orc to Tau and everything in between. But many lesser if not unknown races have been rendered extinct by the actions of the Deathwatch. A good example would be the Thazim, a race on the world of Histilium in the Jericho Reach, so horrifying that they had to be wiped out by bioweapons. But there are probably dozens more who've been condemned to the annals of history by the actions of the Deathwatch. And of course, since there's been a couple of new races on the block in recent times, the Deathwatch have been pretty busy tackling the Tyranids, and by extension the Genestealer cults, along with the Tau. It was the Deathwatch who first uncovered the first known Genestealer cult, more on that later, and they've been involved in all three of the Tyrannic Wars to some extent or another. We don't really know how they participated in the first two, at least as far as I know, but in the third, they paired up with the legendary Inquisitor Cryptman, who of course was the one to name the Tyranids in the first place. A kill team was able to deliver a bioplate to the heart of a tendril of High Fleet Leviathan, killing the Norn Queen and allowing the tendril that was advancing seemingly on terror to be destroyed. Even after Cryptman's extreme methods led to his exile from the Inquisition,
he was able to use the Deathwatch to further his costly yet effective plans. Kill teams captured Genestealers that were then planted on a Space Hulk and sent to the Octarius system in the hopes that the war with the Orc Empire there would cost both sides dearly. It did, but the plan seems to be backfiring at the same time, especially now that Ghazghkull Thraka and the Swarm Lord are on the scene. One assumes that even with the shattering of Hive Fleet Leviathan around Baal, the Deathwatch are still active fighting the Great Devourer, though as of this moment we don't know if they've inducted any Primaris Marines into their ranks due to lack of experience, lack of time, or a combination of many other things. As for the Tau, Deathwatch members are known to have been involved in the second Agralan campaign, though what missions they undertook are unknown since the task of assassinating the Tau's leadership was handed over to the Officio Assassinorum. They've also been launching raids into the Farsight Enclaves, probably as part of frantic data gathering since Farsight's intervention on Agralan was entirely unexpected. But what they've acquired both physically and in terms of knowledge remains to be seen. Most recently of all, around 20 kill teams were pulled out of their usual comfort zone somewhat during the Plague Wars in Ultramar. They were aboard the Starfort Galatan, a key guardian of Ultramar's shipping lanes, along with members of other chapters, including the Grey Knights, when it was attacked by the forces of Nurgle. But of course, despite being Xenos fighting specialists, they are still Space Marines and are thus capable of taking on any foe. Details of the battle are lost, but Imperial casualties were extremely heavy, and the defense prevented the Starfort from aiding Guilliman and his ongoing war on the world of Parmenio. But the Galatan held, and I don't doubt that the Deathwatch played a very key role in that. The Deathwatch's honour roll is filled with famous members, heroes of their chapters, and the Watch in equal measure. Some legends of the Astartes served in the Watch as part of their earlier careers, most notably 2 Ultramarines, Uriel Ventris and Chaplain Ortan Cassius. Ventris served before becoming a captain, and his record in the Deathwatch is unfortunately unknown, but Cassius was in command for a very notable mission, Gozar Quintus. This was the world on which the Imperium first encountered the Genestealer cult, and by extension the Tyranid race as a whole, with Cassius's kill team fighting against the cult of the 4-armed Emperor who had infiltrated and taken over the planet's ruling dynasty. Wasn't the easiest of fights by any means, especially given how nasty a Genestealer Patriarch can be, but the kills team were able to entirely wipe out the cult of the 4-armed Emperor, even if the discovery of the cult's spread rather marred the celebrations. Cassius wasn't in the Deathwatch for much longer after Gozar Quintus, certainly no more than a few decades, as he was back with the Ultramarines in time for the Battle of Macragge in the First Tyrannic War. From there, he would found the Tyrannic War veterans within the Ultramarines, which probably combined the experience of the war with his time in the Deathwatch to great effect. I'd be interested to see if any veterans have gone to join the Watch since their founding. It would make sense. One of the lesser-known chapters to contribute to the Deathwatch is the Mortifactors, an Ultramarine successor who are adept in low light and whose traditions often raise the suspicion of others, including their primogenitor. Nonetheless, one of their captains was heavily involved in a potentially critical mission just before the event that saw the return of Guilliman. His name is Artemis, recruited after showing great zeal and skill against Xenos, and then first involved against Genestealer cults. Raised to command of his kill team after the original commanding Inquisitor was slain, Artemis led his forces to Port Dimensus on the planet, or the crystalline moon I should say, of Coheria. His kill team interrupted a ritual by none other than Eldrad Ulthran of Craftworld Ulthwé, who was hoping to awaken the Eldari god of the dead known as Iniad. The battle between the Deathwatch and Eldrad's Harlequin allies was vicious and ultimately destabilized the ritual, but of course despite the Farseer's failure there, Iniad would begin to awaken not long after through the actions of the emissary Ivrain. One of the more famous Deathwatch dreadnoughts is, and excuse my pronunciation here, Brother Shobshak of the Imperial Fists. Originally recruited into the former 7th Legion in M34 and then joining the Deathwatch in M35, he worked as an infiltrator and fortress breaker for the most part before being almost killed during a mission against the Orcs. He'd actually requested to serve 4 tours of duty with the Roch rather than return to the Imperial Fists, and thus he was deemed worthy of becoming a dreadnought. He currently pilots an ironclad chassis, which makes sense as a siege unit and wall breaker, but like many ancient dreadnoughts, his mind is not what it used to be. Ask Shobshak about the early days, his first vigils as they are known, and he'll regale you with stories until your ear or other auditory receptor falls off. But in memory, well, for recent days, just before his entombment in the dreadnought and afterwards, it's just not there. He's believed to be in the Jericho Reach at the moment, which probably means he's based at Watch Fortress Eriok that we mentioned earlier if he's not out on a mission. Another member of the Deathwatch in that particular region of space is the Dark Angel's epistolary, Zadkiel, also a member of the former First Legion's Inner Circle and thus privy to the knowledge of the Fallen. This is an Astartes who's been around some big names amongst those Dark Angels in the know. He was trained under none other than Ezekiel, Grandmaster of the Chapters Librarius, and he even fought Cypher at some point between joining the Inner Circle and joining the Deathwatch. His time in the Deathwatch has been nothing short of spotless. Despite amassing a rather large file on the epistolary, the Inquisitor overseeing things has no complaints about his work, and yeah, no problems there. He's a skilled strategist and a warrior both, and he likely serves as a useful point of contact for Dark Angel successors who join the Watch. He's known to have a strong rapport with them, which, whilst beneficial for their integration, also reinforces the close bonds between all sons of Lionel Johnson. Finally, I wish to touch on the main stratagems or tactics employed by the Deathwatch, as well as those responsible for developing them. Furor tactics are effectively the anti-horde ones, using obscene amounts of explosives to create a literal field of corpses to halt the enemy. It was originally developed for orcs and then assumedly later applied to Tyranids, so the developer is listed as Squad Viridium as opposed to being assigned to any individual. By contrast, Venator tactics do have a named developer, a White Scars commander by the name of Jargon Khan. Developed against the witch cult Sibylla, the stratagem supposedly relies on jet bikes, though I assume bikes can do it too, leading the enemy along before finishing with a deadly encirclement maneuver. Malleus tactics were developed, despite their name being the same as the Demon Hunter Order of the Inquisition, against Tyranids by Captain Brontos of a chapter unknown. The plan is unbelievably simple. Land Raider assaults against the largest enemies, Carnifex and above according to the battle they were first used in, and power weapons for the rest. Finally, we have Purgatus tactics, which were developed against the Eldari of Ulthwé by a librarian named Delathiu, again chapter unfortunately unknown. The simplified version is to launch focus strikes against the enemy leadership, and though this was obviously used on a Farseer at first, it undoubtedly has applications against Orcs, Tyranids, and Tau as well, war bosses, Synapse creatures, and Ethereals respectively. I'd be curious as to whether there are other tactics for use when those Major 4 don't apply or don't work, or whether Deathwatch commanders are expected to make it up as they go along, though I'm not going to try and find out either, as that would likely involve combat. Never again, not if I can help it. So end the tales of the Deathwatch. The Chamber Militant of the Ordo Xenos may not be as zealous as the Adeptus Sororitas or as specialised as the Grey Knights, but they are still incredibly skilled at what they do and are more than worthy of fear from Xenos and respect from the Imperium. If anything, the diverse skill set required for such a broad range of enemies necessitates even more respect than anyone else, and if you run across those Black Armor Space Marines, I really hope you're on their side. Their unique composition of members of other chapters may be seen as a short-term detriment, but the sharing of knowledge and the flexibility it brings make the Deathwatch a powerful foe indeed. Now then, let us leave Tales of the Watch behind and move on, as there are still many more regiments of renown to cover. Our next stop is a world that, whilst physically untouched by the Horus Heresy, has been heavily affected by it in terms of manpower ever since. For now though, thank you for watching Tactica Imperialis, and I'll see you all again. Goodbye.